Hello, I'm Ethel Cooper and I will be presenting on Chapter 8, which focuses on reading and more specifically in the introduction to reading and word recognition. Okay, so before getting into reading, we'll look at literacy overall. Now, literacy is the ability to read, write, comprehend, and communicate with others. It is this willingness now to engage using language to acquire, construct, and communicate meanings in different aspects of daily living. It is essential and it is an aid in the feeling of independence, both in your academic progress as well as when being involved in community activities. So overall, these are the different things that literacy encompasses. Okay, so now reading in the curriculum. Teachers have to find ways to integrate reading and instruction in all areas of the curriculum. For example, if you're teaching math, if you're teaching science, if you're teaching social studies or religion, you have to find the best way to get reading inside there. And it is reading, as already stated, it is critical and should be reinforced. And so that's why you should go through reading, use reading tactics, no matter which subject you're teaching. Teachers have to, the best way to teach reading is highly debated. However, decoding has been emphasized as the top tier out of all of the other forms. Decoding is more focused on how the success of a student, how the success a student has in the beginning stages of reading, and this is based on focusing on breaking down a word into pieces. And if a student, decoding is focused on saying if a student has success in the beginning stages, then throughout their reading lives, they will have more and more success because they broke the code from foundation. Next is the holistic approach. This approach emphasizes the meaningfulness of language. Language is a bridge to literacy. It includes speaking, listening, and expressive writing. The other approach is whole language. This is where learning is unconscious and unintentional. Learning is ongoing and continual in nature. It cannot be broken down. So this approach is saying that you can't take reading in pieces. You have to take it as a whole and just move forward. Now, when it comes to reading in the curriculum and looking at all these different approaches, there are different ways that teachers can help their students, okay? And the ways include Now, there are ways that teachers can aid their students when looking at these different approaches and trying to infuse reading into the curriculum. They can have great reading choices for the students, things that the students are interested in. And to begin with, they should have resources, just lots of different resources for the students to pick, choose, and refuse from. And then the students should also get an opportunity to respond to what they read or write. And so that's communicating, letting them give feedback, you giving them feedback, and going from there. Now, there are ways that teachers can aid their students when looking at these different approaches and trying to infuse reading into the curriculum. They can have great reading choices for the students, things that the students are interested in. And to begin with, they should have resources, just lots of different resources for the students to pick, choose, and refuse from. And then the students should also get an opportunity to respond to what they read or write. And so that's communicating, letting them give feedback, you giving them feedback, and going from there. Next, we'll look at decoding and whole language, the perspective. Now, methodology, that is very, very important. It's all based on the type of instruction you use. Educators know that no one method works for all students. It's about how you teach the what. And you might have to find different ways to get different things to work for different students. So you can combine the practices. And so it might depend if your students are okay with decoding. You might say I'll do decoding and then a whole language approach, or I'll do holistic and direct instruction. It all depends on which your students are comfortable with and which way of instruction works best for them. Some students catch on quickly, and so they need little instruction, meaning a meaning-based language program would work for them. But students with disabilities need more intensive instruction. A purely whole language program would not really work for them, but a program with incorporation of various instructional techniques or strategies tailored to the student's need would be an option. The holistic approach now is focusing on the meaning and decoding this word, breaking down the phonics which can be used to combine and prove beneficial to students with reading issues. So whole language is about comprehending, trying to understand exactly what this word means. Decoding is focused on the foundation of the word, so breaking it up into pieces. Holistic is the meaning. Comprehension is kind of understanding what it is while okay, so next would be focusing on decoding and whole language. This the perspective. It's very important. Methodology, as you can see here, it is key. Methodology is how you teach the what. It's the type of instruction you use to get a certain set of content across to your students. Now, there are some students who catch on really quickly, and so as a result, they need really little instruction. A meaning-based program would work well for them. However, for students with disabilities, they need more intensive instruction. So a purely whole language program would not be for them, but a program with incorporation of various instructional techniques or strategies tailored to the student's need would be an option. Okay, so direct instruction is just telling your students and they are able to follow your directions step for step without needing much help from you. Next would be decoding. Decoding is focusing mainly on the foundations of reading, and so that's sounding out your words and trying to breaking them up into syllables before you jump into reading. Holistic. The holistic approach now is focused on the meaning of the word. What does this word mean? What is the meaning of believe? What is the meaning of strategy? What do these words mean? And then the whole language approach now is focusing on comprehending the entire thing, getting an understanding. Because even if you have the holistic approach and you know the meaning, that doesn't mean that you have a comprehension of what you're reading. And so you can use a combination of practices. As you can see here, the apple plus the orange makes an unknown fruit. You can do that with your instruction. You can decide to use decoding because your students need to break up the syllables and what's not. But you can also say, hey, I want to make sure my students comprehend what they're reading, and you will decide to use a whole language approach and go from there. It all depends on what works best for you and your students. Okay, now we're going to look at assessment. Assessment is trying to see what your students know, what they don't know, what you need to go back over, what they have solid. And there are two types of assessment, formal and informal. Reading competencies has many components, and the teacher has to understand those facets to better determine what the student knows and what the student doesn't know. And so that's where this informal and formal assessment come in. Knowing, okay, maybe I should use this approach to test my students, or maybe I should use another approach, all depending on what you taught, what you think your students understand, and what you want to test. So that's assessment. Okay, so teacher-oriented assessment, that is also informal assessment. So first is the informal reading inventories, also known as IRI. There are 4 parts to this. There is word recognition inventory, oral reading passages, silent reading passages, and comprehension questions to go with those passages. Now there are 3 classifications of reading ability that can be determined from the IRI. They are the independent reading level. This refers to the vocabulary a student can read without assistance. And so they should get about 95% accuracy on that test. Next is the instruction level. That accuracy should be about 85 to 95. And the instruction level now is when they're doing seat work. And so that's when it's kind of independent practice, but you know you're walking around and you're monitoring to see what your students are doing. And so that's where the instruction level is. And then the last would be the frustration reading level. Students have about 80% or less accuracy. This shows that what you just gave the students, it's too difficult for them to grasp. And so as a result, you would probably have to go a grade level lower or find something that's easier for them to read, to catch on to. Next is the classroom reading inventory. Now, this is a diagnostic tool for teachers who have no prior experience with formal reading inventories. It assesses silent and oral reading, sight word knowledge, listening and comprehension. Next is the observation and checklists. These checklists are developed from a summary of reading competencies. So that's the things that you're reading in class now. It is a good informal diagnostic procedure. The teacher would have assessed the student's level with a checklist that might include some headings such as main idea, sequence, details, cause and effect, fact versus opinion, and the teacher would go through and mark where the student is efficient, depending on which area it is. Now next is the language-based reading disabilities checklist. Now this was developed in 1997 by Katz. It is a checklist for speech language pathologists, teachers, and parents to screen for speech language problems that can indicate reading problems. It is intended for kindergarteners on to 1st grade, but it can be used with older children. Next is the curriculum-based measurement, also known as CBM. It focuses on the student's mastery of his current curriculum. So if your student is in grade 3, it's going to focus on the curriculum for a grade 3 student. If your student is in grade 6, it's going to focus on that curriculum. And it's their mastery of that. It can be done in about 1 to 3 minutes with reading samples, is efficient, valid, easy to understand, and repeatable, which means that you can use the same test again and again, depending on where you are in the semester or how much you think you need to test your student. Next is the criterion referenced test. These are used to measure specific mastery of individual skills. Instead of a broad look like the curriculum-based measurement, it is more on one thing. It is not assessment of performance in relation to standardized samples. Standardized samples would be considered GLAT, BJC, things like that. Instead, it focuses on the ability to perform a specific skill with a specific behavioral objective. And so if your objective is, by the end of the lesson, students will be able, after direct instruction, students will be able to list the organs involved in the digestive system. That is a specific objective, and you would test specifically for that skill. Last is the Lindemood auditory conceptualization test. Now, this is a criterion reference assessment instrument. It is individually administered. It focuses on distinguishing one speech sound from another. It determines that pronunciation of a word is linked to the difficulty in reading. And so it's just saying, okay, this student is having trouble getting these words out, this word out. And so if I'm reading and I'm saying this word constantly, I'm going to have a lot of hiccups, and as a result, my reading will be really choppy because I can't understand these group of words or words that are similar to this. Okay, so next we'll look at formal instruments that are used in assessment tests. But these are now more focused on if your student needs to meet a certain criteria to go into a certain administrative program or what's not. This is the type of instrument that you would use. However, with the informal assessment test, that's used by teachers who don't really have a grasp on evaluations and assessments within the classroom. Okay, so the wide range achievement test that has been revised. This is an individual achievement test that covers arithmetic, spelling, and reading. The test performance determines grade level, standard score, percentile rank, and percentile rank. There are two levels, that is 5 to 12 and 12 to adult. The focus is on word recognition, so it's not ideal for total reading ability judgment. And so that's just saying, I'm just trying to see whether or not you know these group of words. I'm not trying to figure out whether you can read these words in a sentence properly and flow. Next is the Peabody Individualized Achievement Test, which has also been revised. This tests mathematics, reading, recognition, reading comprehension, spelling, as well as general knowledge. It determines what needs to be taught. And so this assessment can be used to help readjust your instructional objectives for your next lesson. And so if you test your students today and you see, okay, this is what they know, this is how I'm going to figure out what they don't know, I'll adjust my objectives. Next now is the Slauson Oral Reading Test. It is also individualized. It tests reading using the sight words. It can be repeated to measure annual achievement. And so that's just saying you can test them at the beginning of the semester and then test them again at the beginning of the next semester to see, has there been any changes? Did they gain any new sight words? Did they fall off? Next is the Gray Oral Reading Test that has also been revised. It measures oral reading fluency and diagnoses oral reading problems. There are two forms. Each has 13 reading passages with oral questions, both ranging from pre-premier to college. Next is the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, revised. It is for grades 1 to 12. This individual test provides specific diagnostic information, and it takes about 30 minutes to administer. The last on this list is the test of phonological awareness. Young children's awareness of individual sounds and specific words, that is what it focuses on. The assumption is that children who are not sensitive to the phonological structure of words will have a more difficult time learning to read. And so if students don't really understand the structure, the way it's set up, they won't really be able to make this connection and read fluently, essentially. So use of the assessment data. So after collecting all of this information about your students, what do you do with it? Well, you put it together and you try and figure out what best can I do for my student? How can I ensure that by the end of the week, by the end of the semester, by the end of this entire school year, they are further ahead than they were before? And so you use this to determine what form of instruction you would use to get them where they need to be. There are different tests and they have different setups. Like this one here, it has an opening for the student's name, their placement, age, and then it has which test did you use. And so let's say you use IRI. And then it has survey, diagnostic, other. But why are you testing? Are you testing because it's a survey, or are you testing to diagnose something? It has phonics, it has consonants, vowels, long sounds, short sounds, digraphs, variant vowels, and blends. And so that's just, you tick where your students actually have an understanding, and then you make note on a separate piece of paper, okay, my students need more help in this, and start brainstorming ideas. The next use of assessment data setup, it is also the same thing essentially. It has the students' names here, however, it just doesn't have whether or not you are testing for diagnostic purposes or survey purposes. But it does have this list of skills. Reading levels, independent and instructional. As previously stated, the independent reading level is where your students have 95% or more accuracy, whilst the instructional level is where your students have 85 to 90% accuracy, and that is when they're doing seat work. The other heading is consonant, and that's initial consonants, final consonants, and consonant blends. So next is vowels, long, short, and variant, as well as prefixes and suffixes. And then there's also called an empty space here for the teachers to list any comments that they have in regards. Now this last one over here, it asks a set of specific questions instead of just a general approach. The first question here is, what are the students' specific strengths? That is a specific question. Now, you as a teacher, you probably had this student for a while. You've already picked up on what this student is really good at. And you decide, okay, this is what they're really good at. And then you go through the rest of the questions and you try to make any adjustments from there. Okay, so next we'll look at word recognition instruction. The first here is sight word vocabulary. These are keywords. These keywords are key. The keywords are key for students with disabilities, disabled learners. With the whole word approach, students recognize important high-frequency words without analysis. These acquired sight words can help with introducing on teaching decoding skills. And so these sight words help because I wouldn't really have to sound out the word the. And the word the shows up a lot in reading if you haven't noticed. And so with the word the students, that's a sight word. The students just breeze through that, and it takes up way less time, and they can spend more time on words that they don't know, words that they need to actually break down. It is immediate and automatic. These words should already be in the learner's vocabulary and speaking comprehension. These words are, you should also use words that are important to students. For example, survival words and phrases like help, get out, keep away, one way. Words like that are survival words. These words are important because you need to know this in case something happens. The focus should be on the imagery level of words as well. The imagery level is how easy it is for students to create a concrete picture based on the word. Now, a high imagery level word would probably be air. You're going to think of your airs. House, you're going to think of someone's house, if not your own. School, you'll think of your college, you'll think of the school that you used to go to. Now, low imagery words are words where the concrete picture really, it varies, or you just don't know what it is. That would be words like idea. What image do you use to describe an idea? That's set. Believe. There's no set image for that. Have. There's no set image for that. The next approach is, the next form of instruction is the Fernald method. Now, with this method, it uses a multi-sensory approach. So that's using language with visual, kinesthetic, and tactile techniques. There are 4 steps to this method. You would get a word from the student, right? You write the word out for the student, large enough so that they can trace it comfortably. And then you let the student, you say the word again whilst the student traces this word that you just wrote. And then you take away the word that you just wrote, and you let the student write this word from memory. And so that's using the visual, kinesthetic, and tactile techniques. Next is word imprinting. Now this is also like the Fresnel's method. It uses a multi-sensory approach, tactile and kinesthetic reinforcement. There are now 6 steps when it comes to this. Teachers would say the word and repeat it. They talk about the meaning, you use this word in a sentence, you discuss it with your student. And then the word configuration is drawn. Now you draw the word, you write the word out for the student. The word is traced by the student. The student now says the word whilst tracing it. And after you take away the paper with eyes closed, the student would write the word. And so that's just reinforcing it step by step by step by step to try and make sure that these students get what you're saying. Next is word banks. These are words the student is familiar with. They are collecting these words and it gives them a sense of ownership. This sense of ownership now increases confidence, and being confident in what you're doing now increases your motivation, and so as a result there would be more drive to try and get this word. Next would be the errorless discrimination. Now students with more severe disabilities, ones that fail to learn through conventional methods, this is now focusing on one word and going through different trials to ensure that they know this word until 100% accuracy is achieved. So for example, let's say you're using the word ensure. Now you're going to go over this word over and over and over. It's repetitive, extremely repetitive, until you are sure that your student can recognize this word out of a list of words properly. They can spell it and they can just pinpoint it. Okay? Next is the EdMark program. There are about 150 sight words. It has been created for grade K to grade 1 or students with mental retardation. It is also for students with some verbal skills such as pointing, repeating, or any receptive language skills. The program comes with a kit with more than 200 lessons, and word recognition material is also included with this kit. And so as a result, you can use these different tactics found in the kit to see what works best for your students and just reinforce that. The last on the list is functional reading. This is using a sight word approach also. A level of literacy is needed for information and protection, especially for high school age teachers, because methodology is now key. So if you're using this with your high school students, you have to ensure that the method that you're using to get this instruction across works best for them. And also another set of key players would be motivation, attitude, and assessment of previous instruction. So if you are motivated and your students are motivated, you're on your way. If both of you have a positive attitude towards the thing that's being taught, the content that you're going over, then you are on your way. But also you need to ensure that when you look back at your instruction and you're going over, you're evaluating yourself, you're evaluating your lesson. As a teacher, you have to make sure that you're making changes that would work for your students. Don't make a change because I didn't really like it. Did it work for your students? Did the instruction get across? Was the lesson a success? That's assessment. You're assessing, was this lesson a success? And you go through those. Was it enhancing what I taught, the form of assessment I used throughout? Was it formative? Was it summative? How exactly does it fit in with what I taught? Did my students actually get it? Okay, so when you're decoding via sound symbol correspondence, foundation is key. It is very important to start from the ground up, and start building with your students. You jump in with easier words, like as we previously stated, some sight words, you sound them out, you break them up. Okay? using the phonetic analysis. With this sounds and symbols are crucial to the foundation of learning to read. If you do not understand this relationship, you cannot move forward comfortably, at least. According to Shaywitz and Shaywitz in 1997, there is a neurological disconnect in these two elements for students with learning disabilities, and that is the main reason it is harder for them to learn this skill. It's about connection with the phonological awareness. Now, how can we as teachers help? Okay, exposure. Using nursery rhymes like hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. That's a lovely nursery rhyme to use if you're trying to introduce your students to new words. Now, phonological segmentation is another way you can help. For example, what sounds do you hear in the word hot? And so they would sound out letter for letter. This is what I hear. Next, you can probably try oddity games. Which sound is different? So if you give your students a set of words, let's say lump, jump, and kite. Which word is different out of that group? Kite, because lump and jump both end in MP. Sound to word matching. Asking students, is the sound ache in the word bike? That's another thing that you can use. Sound isolation. What's the first sound in the word rose? Rose. And last would be probably blending skills. For example, the word crab. You sound out the CR and go from there. Next, with the phonetic analysis, you look at digraphs, initial consonant blends, final consonant blends, long vowel suffixes, prefixes, and so much more. Now, you build on the phonetic. You apply knowledge of the phonological system to written word. Students must be taught sounds of consonant, vowels, and blends. Now, if you're taking the synthetic approach, the teacher would take the word in pieces and let the student put the word together. So, for example, the word cat. You take k, at, and that's the word in pieces, and the student would now cat, put it all together. Now, the other way would be analytic. Now, this is taking the whole word and breaking it up. So, if you're looking at the word cat, you would look at it and you would try to figure it out. You just, you'd let the students give their guesses. However, you would then say, okay, now let's take this apart. This approach is most appropriate for primary students, the students that we will be teaching. Okay, so teaching these phonetic analysis skills according to Grosson and Karnan, 1993. Now, there are a variety of strategies that are available. Teachers are encouraged to develop their own strategies though, because you can adjust and see what works for your students. You would introduce letter sound correspondence in isolation. And so you introduce the word C, and you ensure that your students get that. And then you would teach students to blend sounds to read words. So for the word crab, you start off with C. When you're introducing letter sound correspondence in isolation, you go with R, you do with A, B. And then when you're teaching them to blend, once they know how to blend, they're not going to have to sound out C, R separately. They just get cur. They know that this is automatically CR is cur. And so next you provide immediate feedback on oral reading errors. If your student makes a mistake, you correct them just like that. You don't give it time to fester. You ensure that they know what you said was wrong and you give them the correct word. And then you would provide extensive practice. Practice makes perfect. You give your students different words that has the same blend as CR. Okay? Okay, so next we'll look at teaching phonetic analysis skills with Gallagher and Colson, 1969. There are 6 steps. To begin, you would introduce the word. introduce the letter. You write the letter, write words beginning with the letter, incite words vocabulary, you read the word out loud, emphasize the letter, ask the student for additional words to add to the list. So for this example, we'll be using the word tent, the T in tent. Then you would ask the students to identify. They look at how all the words that they gave are alike. So tent, tool, top. They all begin with the letter T. Next, you would visually cue. The letter sound should have a picture to match. So the word tent, you can find a picture of a tent. That's your visual cue. Then you would synthesize. That is introducing activities requiring use on manipulation of phonetic generalization just learned. So looking at the word and finding different ways to get it to conform to something else. Then you would reinforce. You would assign and supervise practice activities and then review. Remind the student of the letter and ask for words that begin with the letter. So the first, in the introduction phase, the words they gave were tool and tip. Your base word is tent. T is for tent. The introduction words were tool and tip. For your review now, ask them for other words that they might have learned since then. Another word would be talking. Another word can be typing. Those are different words that they can use now when they're reviewing because they probably learned a new set of skills. Now with structure analysis, you're breaking up the word. You're taking the large segment of words and using it for decoding. And so I would look at this whole word and see how I can break it up into pieces to make it easier. The recognition of root words, compound words, prefixes, suffixes, and contractions and plurals all help in the analysis of structure, as well as syllabication. As previously stated, you break the word up and try and figure out, okay, I know that CR is cur, A, B, B. And so you you break it up and try to sound out the word. Well, you get your students to break it up and try and sound out the word. Okay, with the phonological awareness and decoding program, there is the Lindemood phoneme sequence program. It enables learners to identify and sequence individual sounds in their order within words to promote competence in spelling, reading, and speech. So that's essentially identifying the words within the letters within a word and reading it out for themselves. Next would be phonological awareness training for reading. This increases phonological awareness in young children, especially kindergartners and children in grades 1 through 2, who have already shown difficulty in reading. It is a 12-week program that teaches sensitivity to phonological instruction. Next is the direct instruction programs. They focus on decoding, but there is an approach to reading in general. It's highly structured in sequence, each step and criterion objective for learning tasks. And so that means there are steps to it and there are different objectives that are followed. The corrective reading program, also known as CRP. It is a remedial program for upper primary, middle school, and high school students who have not mastered decoding and comprehension. It is also related to the direct instruction strategy. It increases and ensures time on task, which is very important for, as teachers know that we have very little time, and so to get everything in a lesson, that is very important. With these group lessons, now, students answer out loud and in unison. It is fast-paced and it keeps students thinking, and as a result, there is way less time for them to get distracted. Next is the glass analysis for decoding. You teach letter clusters. There are about 119 clusters, which are ranged from most common to difficult. Students learn sound and in the clusters, and then add or change and extend this cluster. So if you learn 5 words, you would learn another 3 words that probably are based on these words, but you have to use more phonics to get them. and they're related, but now it's a broader sense. Okay, last on here is writing to read. It is for beginning readers, words that they already know. It introduces about 42 sound symbol relationships, and students work with a computer, then audio tapes, electronic typewriters, as well as chalkboards and journals. That's writing and reading through. So you're analyzing, you're working through, you're building comprehension, and you're just focusing on, you're not just focusing on reading, you're focusing on comprehension and writing these words out also. So when you're using word analysis in your reading, the letter C-R-U-S-H, crush, can be something to help you remember. So C, context. Contextual analysis for periodic determination of meaning of new words. And so the student would stop and use some context clues and try and figure out, what does this word really mean? R, rapidly focusing on the initial consonant or vowel sounds, prefixes, and suffixes while reading the whole word. And so you take a quick stop, I glance that, and then you just run through. Next would be U, unimportant. That is skipping over words that are not important or words that do not require precise pronunciation, like names. Then you would syllabicate. That is using syllabication strategies to break up the word. So your student will break up the word into pieces and try and sound it out. And H, that is most important in any classroom, but especially with analyzing in reading. Help. You seek help from your teacher, from the pair, or from a dictionary, and try and figure out what's this word, what's the meaning, and then go from there. Okay, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. That was chapter 8 with a subtopic of reading, and the subtopic is word recognition, the introduction and word recognition. Thank you.